Hello and welcome to Kaleidoscope with me, Savithri Rodrigo. It's been a relatively full week. On the People's Bank News Capsule, Team Leader Trade USAID Partner Project Deloitte Consulting Anushka Vijayasinghe looks at what new opportunities there are for Sri Lanka's economic revival post-COVID-19. Putting the spotlight on Pride Month is activist and blogger Ursula Bastiers. Author of Voices of Peace, researcher and writer Sara Kabir places an in-depth focus on reviving reconciliation and fighting racism to unite Sri Lanka. And founder of Breakthrough Studio, Ashanti Soris Merchandani shares a little something to boost your immunity in life in 60. And now, here's your People's Bank News Capsule for the week. On our People's Bank News Capsule this week, we begin with the World Bank forecasting Sri Lanka's 2020 growth as a negative 3.2%. South Asia, like the rest of the world, is seeing growth contract. However, in this doom and gloom, there are some industries which have potential for growth, and it's up to policymakers to identify and support them. Team Leader Trade for USAID Partner Project Deloitte Consulting and an economist whose experience spans the Maldives, Myanmar, South Korea and Sri Lanka, Anushka Vijayasinghe showcases the industry sectors that have potential and the reforms that are needed to move forward.
In this situation, Anushka, what new opportunities do you think there are, and what industry sectors do you think Sri Lanka can pursue post-COVID-19?
So domestically, I think the biggest opportunities are in digital and perhaps also in logistics and in value-added food production. In digital, I think it's obvious across the board. We've seen the demand for going online, from the consumer side and on the business side, transformation of legacy businesses and sectors, and particularly on the digital economy agenda, digital commerce. In logistics, I think smarter supply chains, folks who can bring new business models around logistics in agriculture, I think that would be a win. So that's domestically. On exports, I think immediately there is an opportunity for the export of personal protective equipment by our apparel industry. The project that I'm working with is also already helping them understand FDA regulations for the US market because it's quite stringent. But once the dust settles and beyond the immediate, I think there's opportunities in IT services exports, food and beverage products, but also only if we have a heightened focus on safety, quality, transparency in our supply chain, certifications, positioning it from a health and wellness point of view. And I guess one other opportunity to look at, and I'm yet to see how this will pan out, is the redrawing of supply chains in Asia. And what that means for Sri Lanka, because you're seeing some global manufacturers deciding to diversify their location as a risk mitigation measure, and there could be some opportunities for Sri Lanka to attract new business.
So if you looked at priorities, what are the three policy reforms you think need to be done to explore these opportunities?
So I think it's not just these opportunities, but overall for economic growth and strengthen the economy. The top one would be ensuring there's a sensible fiscal consolidation path with a focus on revenue mobilization and on expenditure rationalization, but done in a way that doesn't choke off growth in the economy because it's at such a sensitive period. The second would be perhaps the passing of the Monetary Law Act. The revisions were done and drafted, and these were really good because it was aimed at ensuring greater independence of the central bank and reducing the fiscal dominance of monetary policy. So that would be my second. And on the third, it would be all about trade. So how all the reforms relating to trade facilitation, simplifying and digitizing of trade procedures, accelerating the implementation of the WTO trade facilitation agreement, which Sri Lanka has signed on to. Anything that makes it easier for our entrepreneurs to do better without facing barriers at our end, even before they go into the global market.
And news from the Colombo Stock Exchange. The indices moved up by 1.1%. The daily turnover was slightly lower than last week at 1.4 billion Sri Lankan rupees. Sri Lanka has increased the minimum working age from 14 to 16 years. Of a child population of 4.5 million, Sri Lanka has about 104,000 working children, mostly from the Kurunegala, Colombo, Gampaha, Monaragala and Batticaloa districts. At least 40,000 of these children are currently engaged in hazardous forms of child labour. Sri Lanka's 52 state-owned enterprises have reduced their cumulative losses by more than 91% in 2019, from 27.96 billion to 2.4 billion. Of these, the CEB and LECO recorded a reduction of their losses, while increased losses were recorded at Sri Lankan Airlines, the National Water Supply and Drainage Board, and Airport and Aviation Services. This month is Pride Month, when the LGBTQ communities celebrate their freedom, or the lack of it as the case may be. The community has struggled to overcome prejudice and gain acceptance. While some countries accept them for who they are, in others they are criminalized, ostracized and even abused. But there are rewards for their struggles, like in the landmark ruling by the US Supreme Court this week, barring discrimination against LGBTQ workers. In Sri Lanka, LGBTQ recognition will still take some years to define, but activist and blogger Ursula Bastians is hopeful. Ursula, what does Pride Month mean for Sri Lanka?
Well, Pride Month, I suppose, means for Sri Lankans who are in the community a chance to celebrate who they are. And for people who are not in the community, a chance to learn about the community.
What is good in Sri Lanka compared to the rest of the region for the LGBT community?
If you're part of the LGBT community in Sri Lanka, you know on some level that there are people and organizations that you can go to if you need help or support in general. And again, speaking from my perspective, I know that there are quite a number of allies out there who would go out of their way to help someone from the community.
So, what do you think needs to change?
I know that a lot of people don't understand the LGBT community to begin with. So maybe they need to take a moment to, be a little more understanding, be a little more accepting of the way other people want to live their lives. Because, if it's not harming anyone and if it's who they are, they deserve that chance, right?
What is the message you would like to give society?
Considering that this is Pride Month, I would like to ask people, for the sake of Pride Month at least, take some time to look into exactly what the LGBT community is, make some friends with people from the LGBT community, and all around just be a little more understanding and broaden your minds.
Meet the first woman to both walk in space and reach the deepest point in the ocean. Astronaut Kathy Sullivan was the first woman from the US to conduct a spacewalk in 1984 and has also conquered Challenger Deep, the deepest point in the ocean nearly 7 miles below the surface. Some London buses are running on coffee. Arthur K's startup BioBean turns waste coffee grounds into biofuel, which is then put into the bus fuel supply chain. The grounds are produced as biomass pellets and home fire logs, powering industrial boilers, heat commercial greenhouses, and into log burning stoves. And that is your People's Bank News Capsule for the week. Let's Talk is next with Sarah Kabir.
Technology is key in moving forward to transform every challenging moment into a profit, where manual becomes digital, business becomes smart, and lives become smarter. People's Bank Online Corporate Banking. It's truly the change you need.
There's been much debate, dialogue, and discussion on Sri Lanka's reconciliation process ever since the end to the war in 2009. The progress, if any, has been constantly pushed on the back burner due to various other issues, including continuous elections, the Easter attacks, and more recently COVID-19 taking priority. But running through all this have also been underlying currents that somehow don't give the same priority and credence to reconciliation as it should, if we are looking at a truly united Sri Lanka. The backing out of commitments made to the Human Rights Council in 2015 in February this year is one such. And there's racism that has reared its ugly head. Writer, researcher, and humanitarian worker Sara Kabir wove a narrative of 10 former LTTE cadres and 10 Sri Lankan military personnel who actively fought on the front lines in her book, Voices of Peace. They were just like us. The powerful narrative showcases both sides of the conflict, blurs the divisive lines, and pushes all of us to think of our common goals. After her bachelor's in social policy from the University of Bristol and her master's in international development and humanitarian emergencies from the London School of Economics, Sara's work gained her a wide understanding of peace building and development work. Today on Let's Talk, Sara gives us an in-depth analysis of the progress, or lack of it, pre and post-COVID, and the best way to take the reconciliation process forward. Sarah, do you feel national reconciliation is difficult and complex in a country like Sri Lanka?
So national reconciliation is not impossible, I want to say, but the difficulty really is because of the lack of political will. And this is because of a system that we have had in place since independence, where leaders have sort of wanted to control the system in the same way that the colonials did, which is to divide and rule. So they've used nationalism as a tool to create these divides amongst us. And the complexity is that it's got ingrained in us, where we now believe that this is true, and we want leaders who perpetuate this sort of majority-minority divides. So we need to break free from that. And to do it is not impossible, but for this we need to revisit our past and understand how we got here.
Pre-COVID, had Sri Lanka made any progress?
I wouldn't say COVID was the turning point. I think it was the elections in 2019 that was really the turning point, which kind of changed the direction of reconciliation. Until then, yes, there was some progress made at the macro and micro level with the establishment of organizations like ONUR and SCRM. But we have to say the progress was slow. We hadn't met the targets that we were supposed to based on the promises we had made internationally and nationally. And the gaps were painfully visible in our lack of interest to address the past, to acknowledge the past. I think our leaders sort of didn't want to take that stand, because accepting and acknowledging the past means not just knowing the injustices, but being able to say that they were wrong and being committed to rectifying it. So I would compare this a little bit with the 60s in Germany. There was a lack of political will to talk about collective guilt, but Willy Brandt was one of the leaders who was the first German head of government to talk about collective guilt for the Germans, and that no German is free of history. And since then, it changed the way reconciliation was implemented in a country. And in Sri Lanka, we didn't even see that even before the elections of COVID.
And what happened post-COVID?
So with elections, there was a halting, and I think with COVID, there was a reversal of the progress made. First, there are a few points that I want to make with this. Understandably, we knew with the change in government that organizations like ONUR and SCRM were going to be dismantled, but these were supposed to be replaced. And I think COVID-19 distracted the government from replacing these. And right now, we don't know a single authority or a single person who is in charge of reconciliation within government. There was also the withdrawal from UN 30-1. There was the release of Sergeant Ratnayaka, which are huge reversals in the progress we had made when it came to reconciliation. And most of us couldn't really say anything or do anything at the time, as we were confined to our homes because of COVID. And to say something against someone who was associated with the military was a bit scary at that point, because the military was also seen as doing a wonderful job in containing the spread of COVID. So COVID therefore put this blind over our eyes. Secondly, it reinvigorated the anti-Muslim sentiments. There was this unfair labeling of patients based on their race and their ethnicity, and we're seeing the impact even today. There was the young boy who was assaulted a week or two ago, and his father was belittled and accused, of being part of the Jatiya that was spreading COVID. There was also a complete disregard to human rights when it came to Muslim burial procedures. The cremation for me looked like a way to create unrest amongst the minority and distract us from the actual issues that were in place, which was the economic crisis and the failure to protect the incomes and livelihood of the poorest and vulnerable in Sri Lanka. Third is the increasing militarization that we saw. They say to control a population, the best way to do that is to create a fear psychosis. And COVID, handed that in a platter. So it sort of justified the sort of initial task forces that we saw military led, even for the distribution of food. And it set this precedent that this has now become a new way for policy to be implemented without a parliament in place. So now we have a military task force, which has nothing to do with COVID, which is looking into keeping a virtuous, disciplined, lawful society. It is headed by a retired Kamal Gunaratne, and who is Kamal Gunaratne? He was someone who was one of the first to greet Sunil Ratnayaka when he was released. And Sunil Ratnayaka is someone who has killed a 5-year-old boy, along with many others. Kamal Gunaratne is also someone who, in 2017, at one of the Riyadh Maga seminars, was found saying that anyone who supported a new constitution deserved death and that they should not be granted proper funeral rights. So it's very frightening when these are the people who are going to be defining to us what antisocial behavior looks like, what a virtuous society should look like. And finally, the archaeological committees. That is something that I find very difficult to wrap my head around. There is no argument that there is a rich archaeological heritage in Sri Lanka that needs to be preserved and protected. But when we are focusing only on the east for one, because that place, it's a hotbed. Prabhakaran's mishandling of the east was one of the reasons for his demise, really. And we don't want to be going down that same path. The east can very much be, showcase the rich cultural diversity, the demographic diversity in Sri Lanka, but it is also a place that you can set off ethno-religious fires that would be very hard to control or manage.
Are we mixing up national security and the restoration of normalcy as the process to building reconciliation and nation building?
Yeah, so based on what I was saying, with the increase in militarization, we see this. One of the things that has become a topic of discussion in Sri Lanka is always about national security. And it is an aspect of reconciliation that we need to consider. But when it is always at the forefront of discussion, you're keeping the country at this constant war footing, really. And we are always afraid. We're seeing enemies around us all the time. And it is very likely that then these minority phobias get manipulated, and whenever it is fit for the government, when they want to keep control of the population, to talk about the resurgence of Tamil tigers or Islamic fundamentalism or Christian Catholic fundamentalism even. And this conversation is always brought in the context of securing or making the country a safe place for its true owners, thereby exacerbating the majority-minority divide, which is not what reconciliation is about. And restoration of normalcy. I mean, what is normal? We've not seen normal even since we had independence. So we have to go back to a place where we have to be better than where we were when all of this started, really.
So do citizens of Sri Lanka actually see that they are primary stakeholders in this reconciliation process?
There is a combination, when I look at the regular citizen, there's a combination of apathy and ignorance. Apathy mostly in the sense that not everyone has the luxury to be thinking about these things, right? Because most people are trying to just get by in life. Think of the single mother in Anuradhapura who's trying to feed her children, or the farmer who has to pay off his debt. They don't have the space to think about these things. But I'll tell you a quick example of how it can finally affect us all. When I was doing research for the book I authored, Voices of Peace, one of the storytellers, he lived in Martale, he was Tamil, and he said, the 50s and 60s, the tensions didn't really affect them because they had other issues in their family. Plus, he spoke Sinhalese well, he had Sinhalese friends. But then in 83, when innocent Tamils were persecuted, it finally caught up to him as well. He was chased out of his home and he ended up in the hands of the LTTE, where he served for nearly 3 decades. So right now, there are a lot of grievances, and it takes just a little bit of fuel to ignite the fire. And that mother, her children might be very much the ones who have to go to the front line of the Sri Lankan army and lose their lives. What is mostly frightening is the willful ignorance or blindness amongst some of us in Sri Lanka. There's a lot of attempts, even in my generation and probably even in yours, to not address the mistakes that we have made. We are ashamed to address it. We want to turn a blind eye, and we don't want to burden our conscience with it. So we need to rethink and reimagine what our responsibilities are as a citizen when it comes to reconciliation.
Give me 3 steps on how you would recommend in taking the reconciliation process forward.
First and most importantly is to talk about it. I know it's frustrating sometimes for everyone to be hearing about problems all the time, But right now, with a very weak opposition, it is very important that we provide the checks and balances. So we need to talk about it, and when we engage in these conversations, it will help us to rethink our biases and how we treat the other in Sri Lanka. Secondly, I have been saying this in different ways maybe, but we have been trapped in this sort of vicious cycle where our leaders have used our ethnic or religious traits to pin us against each other, when nationalism has been used as a tool to create divides just for their own political gain. So we have to break free from this cycle, and how we can do that is to rethink our understanding of majority and minority. Minority does not mean that you are entitled to less rights. We are all equal citizens in Sri Lanka. Third and most important, this is to my generation, our knowledge of Sri Lanka's history is atrocious. And this might not be a fault of ours because our history curriculum did not teach us this. So we have to make a concerted effort to learn about our past, and then we will be able to accept it and acknowledge it and be a step ahead of the previous generations, because there is this sense that they are ashamed, they say lajjai, to talk about the past. Only once we can accept it will we be big enough as a country to really be true when we say never again. A vast majority of today's population, they are not guilty for the crimes that were committed. They might not have even been born, they might have been children, but we cannot ignore what happened in the last 5 or 6 or 7 decades. There's a grave legacy that was left, and we have to learn from these mistakes. All of us, whether we are old or young, whether we are guilty or not, we are affected by the consequences, so we are liable for it. We can't change the past, we can't modify it, but if we turn a blind eye to it, we are pretty much being blind to the present. We very much then risk repeating the same cycles of violence.
And a thought to ponder on as we head to the weekend. Rethink our understanding of the majority and the minority. And that minority or majority, we are all equal citizens of Sri Lanka and entitled to the same rights. Thank you, Sara Kabir, for joining us on Let's Talk today. I hope that your generation will make a concerted effort to learn about Sri Lanka's past, accept it, acknowledge it, and then be big enough as a country to say, never again. That's where our future lies. Coming up next in Life in 60, we all need a boost to our immunity. Ashanti Soris Merchandani lets us into a secret. When COVID-19 hit with catastrophic force, the one thing that echoed in our heads was keep your immunity up. It only catches you when your immunity is weak. Forget the chemicals and the artificial immunity boosters. We all have great natural stuff at home that we can use to boost our immunity. Today, on Life in 60, founder of Breakthrough Studio and certified fitness coach who specializes in weight loss and nutrition, Ashanti Soris Merchandani shares one of her favorite immunity boosters.
Immunity has been a trending topic for the past few months, and now more than ever we need to focus on what we eat on a daily basis. So here I'm going to show you how to make a turmeric latte using just very basic ingredients that you will find at home. I'm going to make the latte with coconut milk. It's vegan, but if you like, you can make it with dairy milk, almond milk, or whatever nut milk that you wish. So I'm also going to use turmeric powder, which is our main ingredient, and I'm using organic turmeric powder and just a little pinch of pepper so that the curcumin in the turmeric will get absorbed by our body. And it's really simple. This is how you make it. So a little bit of hot water. I'm just going to add a little bit, and 1 teaspoon, roughly 1 teaspoon of turmeric, just a little pinch of pepper, and I am going to add my coconut milk to taste. So I like my turmeric latte very thick, so I'm going to add the whole lot of coconut milk into it. Try not to sweeten it with sugar or honey. It's nice by itself. Plus, we don't need the extra calories. And this is your turmeric coconut milk latte. If you like to spice it up, you can add some ginger and cinnamon. Both will again enhance your immunity.
So, don't forget to add that splash of crushed ginger or a dash of cinnamon for an added immunity boost. Thank you very much, Ashanti, for that super turmeric latte. So there's lots to think about as you head into the weekend. Thank you for joining us on Kaleidoscope. If you would like to give us any feedback or any suggestions or about any stories you'd like to see, please email us on kaleidoscopeweekly1@gmail.com. So until next week, stay positive and act sensibly as you head back to normalcy. Now, here's your Kaleidoscope takeaway. World peace begins with inner peace.